For today's lesson, I want you to open your ELA notebooks to the first section, Section 1, titled Grammar, and go to the next available blank page. At the top, we're going to write the title of our lesson, which is Complete Sentences. And to focus our lesson a little bit clearer, we're going to write this statement. I can write using complete sentences. Okay, so if we are expected to write complete sentences, we first have to ask ourselves, what is a complete sentence? So write the following definition. A complete sentence is a group of words that contain a subject, verb, and expresses a complete thought. A complete sentence is a group of words that contain a subject, verb, and expresses a complete thought. Underline the words complete sentence. A complete sentence is also known as an independent clause. Now, the term independent clause is a more advanced term, really to express the same idea. But when we look at that word independent, we kind of break independent clause apart a little bit. Independent means it's able to stand alone. While the word clause simply means a group of words. So just like our definition above, see a group of words, just like our definition above, where a complete sentence is a group of words that expresses this complete thought using a subject, noun, and verb, an independent clause is also a group of words and it's able to stand alone because it has a subject and a verb and it expresses a complete thought. Now, this idea of an independent clause is important because what we end up with sometimes is something called a dependent clause. And a dependent clause is what you've heard of before called a sentence fragment. So now let's define a sentence fragment. A sentence fragment is a group of words that are missing either a subject or a verb or does not express a complete thought. A sentence fragment is a group of words that are missing either a subject or a verb or does not express a complete thought. Underline the words sentence and fragment. And as I said before, another term for a sentence fragment is a dependent clause or a subordinate clause. Okay, and let's break this down a little bit. The word subordinate actually means of less importance. So if it's of less importance, then it's of less importance to what? And that would be the thing that is more important. And a clause, of course, still means the same thing. It's a group of words. So putting that together, a subordinate clause is a group of words that are less important. So less important than another part of the sentence. So a subordinate clause is also known as a sentence fragment because it's missing part of what it needs to make that complete thought and to make a complete sentence. So you've learned that you can have either a complete sentence or a sentence fragment. Also that a complete sentence can be referred to as an independent clause, and that a sentence fragment can sometimes be referred to as something called a subordinate clause. So let's look at some examples of each of these. Turn the page and go to the top of the next blank page. And we're going to do a few examples of each. So first, write EX, example, okay, and fragment. Okay, here's an example of a sentence fragment. Visited an old Spanish mission in San Diego. Okay, it looks like a complete sentence because we're starting with a capital letter. We're ending with punctuation. We've even capitalized a couple of proper nouns here, but this is not a complete sentence. When we ask ourselves, when we're looking to find out, is this actually a complete sentence, there's three questions we can ask ourselves, and I want to put them at the top here. Number one, what is the subject? In other words, what is the sentence mainly about? Next is, what is the verb? In other words, what's happening to the subject? And lastly is, does it express a complete thought? Okay, so let's look at the sentence that we just wrote. Visited an old Spanish mission in San Diego. The first question, what is the subject? Well, we're left wondering right from the beginning, who visited an old Spanish mission in San Diego? So if we're having to ask ourselves who, then that means that we are missing our subject. We're wondering who. So what's our subject? Does it contain the other ones? How about, what is the verb? Visited an old Spanish mission in San Diego. Visited is our verb. Okay. And it does not express a complete thought because we're still missing our subject. It has to have a subject and a verb in order to express a complete thought. So we do not have a subject. So let's rewrite this sentence and try to include a subject. We'll use the verb that we have in the rest of the sentence and then see if in the end it actually is a complete thought. So how about this? My family visited an old Spanish mission in San Diego. Let's try our questions again now. What is the subject? Okay. What is the subject of this sentence? The subject is family. Okay, so what is the verb? In other words, what did the family do? They visited. Okay, and does this express a complete thought? My family visited an old Spanish mission in San Diego. It is clear to me that it involves a family and what they're doing, and it's telling us even where they went. So I'm not left with any major questions about the fact that they were visiting an old Spanish mission. Okay, let's try another example. So here's an example again of a fragment. And I guess if we stop for a moment and go back to the top, we should write here that we corrected it, so we know that one of these is correct and one of them is not. So write corrected next to the second sentence, and now let's go down to the next one, which is another example of a fragment. Okay, here's our next sentence. Alonzo's sisters and brothers. Okay. Again, this looks like a complete sentence. It starts with a capital letter. It ends with a period. But it's definitely missing something. Let's look at our questions at the top. The first question is, what is the subject? If the sentence says Alonzo's sisters and brothers, then I think the subject's going to be sisters and brothers. This is called a compound subject. Okay. And if we have our subject, what about the next question? What is the verb? So what are the sisters and brothers doing? This is where the problem lies. It's not telling us anything about what they're doing. So we're left to wonder, what's happening? So what is what we're wondering? That's our verb. So let's recreate this sentence, and let's add a verb. So here's our sentence fragment, and here's the corrected version. Alonzo's sisters and brothers planned a surprise party for his birthday. Alonzo's sisters and brothers planned a surprise party for his birthday. Let's use our questions to check again. The first question was, what is the subject? We decided a moment ago that the subject would be sisters and brothers. The next one is, what is the verb? So what are the sisters and brothers doing? They planned. And does it express a complete thought? Alonzo's sisters and brothers planned a surprise party for his birthday. Yes, I think it does. We have who it's about, we have what they did, and we have some more details even about what they did to help complete that thought. Okay, let's look at our last example. Here's another example of a fragment. As I walked to school yesterday. Okay, again, this looks like a complete sentence. It starts with a capital letter and ends with a period, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a complete sentence. So we need to check for our three key ideas, key questions to help us know if it's a complete sentence. First one is, what's the subject? as I walked to school yesterday. Well, it sounds like the subject, what or who the sentence is focusing on, is I. So here's my subject. And the second question is, what is the verb? So what did I do? I walked. So here we have a verb. So we have our subject, we have our verb. The last question is, does it express a complete thought? As I walked to school yesterday. See, after I read this, it's like it's missing something. It's like I'm wondering, well, what was happening as you were walking to school yesterday? I'm left with questions about it. That word as at the beginning of it completely changes this thought. It's telling me that while this was happening, something else was going on. Therefore, this is not a complete thought. So I need to change this into a complete thought. And actually, this statement here, this group of words, is what we would call a subordinate clause. It's that group of words that just can't stand alone. It needs something else to go with it. So we're going to connect this subordinate clause to an independent clause and actually create a really nice sentence. So we're going to start with the sentence, as I walked to school yesterday. I'm going to write corrected here also. And then we're going to start the same way. We're going to start with that subordinate clause. As I walked to school yesterday. We're going to answer that question we were wondering. What was happening while you were walking to school yesterday? So as I walked to school yesterday, comma, I saw Mr. Saunders walking his dog. I saw Mr. Saunders walking his dog. Now we have a subject, which was I, going back to that subordinate clause at the beginning. And what did I do? I walked. So here's our subject. And here's our verb. But remember, it cannot stand alone here. Our subject doesn't change as we continue our sentence. We've got to stick with the same subject if we're going to complete the thought that we were having. So I, in that second part, is actually, that's still our subject. It hasn't changed. But it's giving you something else that they did at the same time. So it's I saw. So this is another verb in our sentence. Okay. The second part, I saw Mr. Saunders walking his dog, this is a complete sentence. This is what we would also call an independent clause. We do not need the beginning of this sentence to state this, I saw Mr. Saunders walking his dog. But it makes a more complex sentence, a more complicated sentence if we add that beginning part, which was the subordinate clause. As I walked to school yesterday, comma, and then our complete sentence. I saw Mr. Saunders walking his dog. And all together, this makes one good, complete sentence. All right, we will practice this skill and more tomorrow. Have a great night.